Well, good morning and welcome to our stories. Our guest today is Lori Shimizu.
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 Yeah.
Okay. And I have to say, of all the First Pres people I interviewed, that she has a childhood that is really different from any other member of the church, at least that I've interviewed so far. So tell us about your childhood and your Peace Corps childhood and
Okay.
okay.
I was born in Newport Beach, California, so I am a West Coastie. And childhood seemed pretty ordinary until I was 9 years old. And then my parents, they asked us girls, it was my sister and I, they said, now, girls, we're thinking of going to help people in another country. How do you feel about that? And, you know, we had questions like, well, will there be TV? Are the crocodiles going to eat us? Will we take the dog? But we went, and we were one of the first families in Peace Corps. My parents had always wanted to go in the Peace Corps, but by the time they met each other, the Peace Corps was only taking single people. Then when they were taking couples, my parents already had my sister and I. So we had to wait a little bit, but when I was 9 and my sister was 7, we went into Peace Corps, and our first place was a little group of islands called Palau, which is now its own country, and they're a no nukes zone. And we stayed there for 1 year, and we stayed in Malaysia for 2 years. So pretty idyllic for a kid.
Yeah. And then after the Peace Corps, your family came back to the United States, but they didn't follow the kind of traditional method of landing, I guess, in terms of most people would say, well, you know, I went where I got offered this job, so that's where I went.
Right.
It didn't work that way in your family, did it?
No, my family, my mom and dad were both born and raised in the LA, Orange County area in California, and it was just too smoggy and too many people for their girls. And so when we came back from our travels, we moved to Northern California to a little town called Vina, which was a farming town, and it was 600 people if you counted all the farms around the county. So really, really small.
Yeah. So it was probably more like the South Pacific and less like LA.
Exactly. I think we all had such culture shock when we came back.
Yeah.
We thought Americans, for the most part, looked fat, and there was just so much stuff after not having had TV or hard surface roads. We kind of had culture shock, so it was okay to be out in the country.
Yeah. And it turned out that there was really kind of a pretty significant bonus for you
Yes.
by their settling in this town.
Yeah, and my parents didn't know about it at the time, but in Vina, there was a scholarship available to anyone who had gone to, that had lived in Vina or Las Molinas, the neighboring town, for the 4 years of high school, and had gone to Las Molinas High School. You could get your 4 years of college paid for.
Yeah.
And that was back, I graduated in 81. And so, I mean, college was not that expensive, but to have it paid for by somebody who doesn't even know you. He was, I can't remember how he made his money. I think he was a farmer who did really, really well. And he didn't have kids, and so he set up this trust to take care of all of the children in this town as they came through. So, I went to Chico State. My sister graduated from Stanford, all thanks to Scott Pritchett.
Yeah. So you graduated and decided to follow your parents' footsteps and join the Peace Corps.
I did, and they kind of cautioned me. They're like, "Okay, Lori, are you sure you want to do this?" And my response was, "I'm gonna go teach English and to people who really want to learn it, and everybody here thinks they're entitled, and I was just off to set the world on fire." And I came back in 3 weeks.
Yeah. So it didn't quite turn out the way you had anticipated.
It didn't. What I realized was that much as in California, when they talk about Mexicans or other people coming over the border, and they're like, "Oh, they're taking jobs from people that live in California." A lot of the time, we're cheap labor for the government, and that's what was happening with Peace Corps volunteers. They were in the teaching areas that were out in the boonies. They weren't in in the city in
Right.
Nairobi where things were happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a very short, it taught me a lot, a very short stint in
Yeah.
Kenya.
Yeah.
And I realized, and I felt like a failure for a long time because I felt like I didn't fulfill
Right.
my personal mission.
Yeah.
But my parents were both really supportive, and they're like, "Hey, you saw that it was a need had been met by the Peace Corps, but that need was no more, and it was time to move on."
Yeah. All right, so you returned to the U.S. and you got a job with an insurance company.
I did.
And you were with them for like 10 years?
Yeah, I was first with Progressive Insurance, and then I worked at USAA for 5 years. And insurance is great money, but it is so disgustingly boring.
So then you decided, okay, 10 years, this is enough. Now what?
So I worked in insurance for 10 years. I was actually poached to go be a trainer at Verizon Wireless. I did that for 1 year, and that was during 9/11. I remember that because I had a training class. And, everybody was like trying to find their family on the East Coast. But after that happened, I had been there about a year, and I told my boss, I said, this is fine, but I just want you to know, eventually I am going to be going back to school. I'm going to become a teacher. Because I realized that teaching children is a lot different from training adults that
Right.
don't necessarily want to be there.
Yeah.
And so then Verizon had a nationwide layoff of like 3,000 plus people. And I can remember calling my dad, and I said, "Guess what?" And he said, "You got fired today, didn't you?" So he knew. It was no surprise to him.
Yeah.
But that was the biggest blessing because I went back to school. I had been teaching Sunday school,
Yeah.
but I had always said, I will never be a teacher. They don't get paid, they don't get respect, blah, 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 all the things that people say. But I went back to school, and I was in a program that was a collaborative between Sacramento State and UC Davis. And I had my teaching degree in a year and a half.
Yeah.
So in 2003, I started teaching, and I haven't stopped.
Okay. And then along in there, you met your husband.
I did. We've only been married 15 years. It'll be 16 years this year. And our one regret is that we didn't meet earlier. But I tell him I don't think either one of us was ready earlier,
Yeah.
so it was okay. He is a Chicago resident, an Illinois native, born and raised in Chicago. And he had wanted a change and came to California for a job. And shortly after that, we met through an online service through eHarmony, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
But yeah, he told me his boss's boss didn't care for him, and this job wasn't going to work out. And I was like, you're paranoid. And the day before his 1 year anniversary, they said, thank you so much for your service.
Yeah.
And so then our Midwest tour began.
Yeah.
And we've been in Decatur since 2014. So that was good.
Yeah.
When he first lost his job in California, that actually turned out to be a blessing, because his dad had, he's going to kill me. I think it's colon cancer. He was sick for 5 years. And I got to meet his dad once before he passed away at New Year's. And he was a really nice man.
Yeah. Tell us about Brian's folks.
Lovely people. Mom grew up in San Francisco. Dad was the son of strawberry farmers in Washington, around the Yakima area. And they were children of the 40s. And so there was an executive order, number 9066, that during World War II caused Japanese American people that were on the coasts to be rounded up and put in internment camps. And it happened that both Brian's parents, even though they were from different states, they ended up in Heart Mountain in Wyoming. And there was about, I think it was 9,000 or 10,000 people there at the time. And his dad was one of 5 brothers. They kind of had a name for themselves, and not a good one in camp, because they would go out and work. I didn't realize this until Brian and I were researching camp life. They would go work on other people's farms and then come back at night and sleep in Heart Mountain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get the feeling his dad was kind of a hellraiser.
But his mom and dad were both at Heart Mountain.
And never.
But they never met.
No, they didn't. They didn't meet until both their families went to Chicago. I don't know if his mom's father went to San Francisco, or if he already knew that his paint store had been taken, that people weren't going to give it back. And then Brian's dad's family went to Kansas City, did not find it favorable. Lots of bigotry against the Japanese. And so both families settled in Chicago because it was a big enough cosmopolitan area.
Yeah.
They could find work and a place to live.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about your faith journey, all the way from Malaysia to First Pres.
Okay. So in growing up, even I think my parents would be deemed hippies. I didn't know it at the time. I mean, they were mom and dad.
Right.
But we belonged to a First Baptist church in Redlands, California, and my parents were really good friends with one of the ministers there that did the early service, the more progressive service in the morning. And so we would go to early church with the parents. Then the parents would go out to breakfast, and all of us kids would go to Sunday school while they're eating breakfast. So that gave me my grounding. And my dad was a deacon in the church. My mom did Ruth Circle and stuff. So we were pretty involved. When we went to Palau, my sister, I don't even know why. I was in public school, and my sister went to Mary Stella Catholic School with the nuns, with the rulers, in 2nd grade. And I don't remember why she was at a different school than I was. But we didn't really have much of a church life there. We had lots of experiences that we were definitely praying about and for, and you know, God saw us through. But then when we got to Malaysia, we lived in Ipoh, Malaysia for 2 years. And there was a stone Presbyterian, much like the color of the stone on our building, only just a smaller version.
Yeah.
And there was a reverend there, Reverend Derek Kingston. And I had the biggest crush on him, and I believed everything he said. And I did the birth story of Jesus, and I was so glad I was wearing a long a maxi dress covering my legs because my legs were shaking because I was in front of everybody. But I just, you and I had talked before about sometimes you meet people and you just go, that is a person of God.
Yeah.
They are tuned in. And Reverend Kingston was one of those people for me. And so then after we came back from Malaysia, in Northern California, where we landed, people were fairly conservative. We went to the church down the street, and the first thing out of the pastor's mouth, who was actually the father of one of my peers, he said, yeah, you know, these people with their beards and their lives, and we don't cater to people like that here. And so that was it. We never went back. And so it wasn't until I was in college and after college that I found my way back to church on a regular basis. And I belonged to a Presbyterian church in Sacramento for 17 years, I think. And I was just so happy to find First Pres because I knew it was the right flavor. I love that that social justice is very important to this group, and all kinds of social justice.
Yeah.
That's something that's dear to my heart. That's something that Brian and I, you know, we want to make sure that people are not treated like the Japanese Americans were treated in World War II. So we're very wary of conditions in the U.S. these days.
Well, and you were raised with people who were really strong into social justice.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
You know.
You know, they always, if we have something, you have it too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I feel like I hit the lotto on I hit the parent lottery and the husband lottery. I mean, life is good.
Yeah. Thanks so very much for sharing with us. It's really been enjoyable, and I'm sure others will enjoy your story too.
All right, thank you.